Hi everybody, welcome again to BDO's People Advisory Webinar Series 2020. Today is all about demonstrating the profit in your people. People are your greatest asset and also one of your largest expenses. We all know that in any organisation, it's usually the biggest expense line for you. So it seems obvious, and yet there can be such a reluctance to make an investment in your people, whether that be building capabilities to lead, absorbing a new change, investing in wellness, whatever it might be. So why is that? Perhaps it's linked to the fact that the benefits and positive impacts on organisational performance are not as obvious or tangible when it comes to human capital. When you compare it to something like a technology platform or product innovation or efficiency, those impacts are so tangible and so easy to quantify. So we're so glad to have you with us this morning to explore how investing in your people, even during times like these, can drive better business outcomes and improve your bottom line. Richard Branson is well known for his philosophy and statement that customers second, your employees first, and shareholders third. He says that if people are proud of the job they do, you give them the needed tools, allow them to be proud of the brand, looked after and treated well, they will be happy, and ultimately so will the customer. This in turn drives shareholder returns. They all work together and are intrinsically linked. During our 45 minutes together today, we will explore what is the correlation between people and your profits, where to invest in your people for maximum return on investment, and we're going to look forward to having a great discussion and sharing some great perspectives with you. Before we kick off, first of all, I wanted to introduce you to our team. So I'm Janine Waters, and I'm our partner here at BDO, leading our National People Advisory practice. We're also joined by Marianne Carter, Associate Director in our People Advisory team.
Hello, everyone.
Vanessa Vaillant, Senior Manager in People Advisory.
Good morning.
And Callie Mitchell, Manager in our People Advisory team and leader of our virtual HR function.
Good morning, everyone. Great to be here.
So before we get into the nitty-gritty, just a few housekeeping issues. First of all, you can submit questions in the questions tab. All submitted questions will be responded to via email after the session concludes, and we'll try to answer as many questions as we possibly can during the session. So if you have a question, do type it in. If we can get to it, we absolutely will. The presentation slides are loaded into the webinar as a handout for you to access. So you can see that highlighted on the right there. And if you have any technical difficulties, go to https://support.goto.com/webinar, for those of you who for some reason may not be able to see that on your screen right now. Post-session, you'll be sent an email with the presentation slides, a link to the recorded session, access to our past and future webinars, and our contact details. We do encourage you, if you have any questions that you don't get to ask during today's session, do reach out to any one of us directly. We are always happy to talk. Now, I'm going to hand over to Vanessa, who's actually going to lead the discussion today. So Vanessa, how do people impact the bottom line?
Great question, Janine. Good morning, everyone. We're really excited to be here with you today. We're going to walk you through, what is the correlation between people impact and the bottom line. And as you can see on your screen, there is an immense amount of data to support the correlation between people and profits. And as Janine said, it still seems so difficult to make a case for investing in your people. So let's start by looking at the numbers, and then we'll share a bit of our experience, our examples, our stories. Callie, Marianne, and Janine will jump in to make this come to life. But let's start with the actual facts. So profit growth. So Gallup will say that firms with higher levels of employee engagement report 21% higher profitability. That's significant enough to want to look at that number twice and have a look internally to see what your levels of engagement are. And then when you look at shareholder value, so these are all key metrics that you'd be reporting in any organization, hopefully. And if not, you want to look at how you can get these data points, because that will help drive your people strategy and demonstrate the value in that. From a shareholder returns perspective, so Aon Hewitt, well known in the industry, they find that firms with higher levels of employee engagement generate total shareholder returns that are 22% greater than the average. That's quite significant as well. And when you look at productivity, the research shows that firms with higher levels of employee engagement report 20% higher productivity.
That's fantastic.
Yeah, and that's what many businesses are striving for, that greater productivity.
Exactly.
And customers, this is a big one, the shift towards our customers, and everything is being designed around them. So how do you ensure their experience is impactful and is happy? Because the reality is engaged employees establish better relationships with clients and customers. They're in direct contact with them time and time again. So how they act, feel, how they represent your brand will have an impact on your bottom line. And Groove HQ says that 82% of customers left a company because of bad customer service experience. 82%.
That's huge. Even when you get onto Google or you're looking at reviews, you can very clearly see what a culture would be like internally based on what customer feedback is.
Yeah, exactly.
What I find really fascinating as well is when you think about how many hours or how much it costs you in marketing, in whatever way it is that you have to onboard a customer in the first place, the impact from a financial perspective on any customer that leaves you. And for many organizations, you'll actually know that metric of what it costs to attract a customer versus what it costs to retain a customer. So when you think about, if you've got 82% of your customers leaving because of the culture essentially that you've created in your organization, how valid it is to invest in that culture.
Absolutely.
That's exactly right, Janine. And you know, the research also shows that once you lose a customer, the ability to get them back, you have to work twice as hard, and it's unlikely in most cases.
Yeah.
Wow.
So that's time well spent. And then when you look at more traditional HR metrics linked to people costs, so turnover, for example, the corporate executive boards finds that engaged employees are 87% less likely to leave the organization than disengaged employees. 87%.
Yeah.
That's significant.
And again, what I find really interesting when we talk to organizations is quantifying the cost of turnover for your business is really important, because usually when we talk to a client, the first thing they think of is just the actual cost of a recruitment process and maybe a fee that they may pay a recruiter. But in actual fact, we know that the cost of turnover is far, far more than just that cost. And I know we'll get to that in a little while.
Yeah, well, I have a stat right here, actually. The cost of replacing employees can be up to twice their base salaries, depending, of course, on the wage, the role, the experience, the organization.
Yeah.
That will cost you twice as much.
Now, think of this. That's their base salary. Now look at the other metrics we're talking about and the impact that has on it. So when people keep leaving, the ability and the want for other people to then train the new person, it begins to shift. Because if they think, oh, they're going to leave anyway, they're not going to invest in them. So you begin to see behaviours shifting.
Well, you also see that your ability to attract new staff is impacted as well.
Yeah.
We live in an environment where you can find out anything about an organisation. You go onto Glassdoor, people will go and find out how do you stack up as an employer. And so the higher your turnover is, the more likely you're going to find it difficult to replace those vacant positions with quality staff if they're seeing that there are indicators in the market that you're not a great employer to work for.
Yeah.
And I think that turnover and therefore your happy customers is going to be very linked. To Janine's point, the information is accessible at your fingertips. You can instantly Google, and if you're a new employee looking to join a new organisation, you're absolutely going to look about what your customers are saying about that organisation.
Yeah, very true.
And people are looking for purpose, and they're very particular about who they want to work for now.
Yes.
And it's more than just, you know, the ping pong tables and the experience you receive, but they want to know that they're supported by a management team, that they're connected to a greater purpose, and that people are staying in that organization and the employer is really investing in them.
Now, this is going to be an interesting one, and I don't mean to digress a little bit, but I think you'll find many corporate leaders out there or smaller business leaders are sitting there saying, well, in this market, people will feel lucky to have a job. So you might actually find that, yes, people will, accept a job or stay in a job that they're not necessarily really happy about. But as we can see in your next key statistic, that can still play out in other behaviours within the organisation that still have an impact on the bottom line.
Yeah. And actually, what you're saying there is very important. So just because someone shows up does not mean they're going to be productive. Does not mean they're going to increase any shareholder value or increase your profit. It just means they're showing up. So your ability to really understand who your talent is and who you're driving towards keeping becomes very, very important.
And I think that piece is really important because it's probably not an area we look at significantly. We don't tend to look at absenteeism and the people that are just turning up and not actually doing anything in detail. We tend to look at some of these other key areas. It's easier to look at turnover. It's easier to look at what your customers are saying. It's obviously easier to look at productivity and shareholder value. But what is that absenteeism actually doing for your organisation, as well as the reverse of that as well, people that are just turning up that are disengaged?
Yeah.
That's a great point. And the statistic around that is that Gallup finds that firms with high levels of engagement see 41% lower absenteeism rates. Again, all these metrics are quite significant in terms of demonstrating the value of investing in your people on organizational performance. And really, there's an overwhelming amount of information, of research, studies, white papers, statistical regressions on how investing in your people supports organizational performance. And, maybe that's part of the problem. There is so much information, it's hard to know where to start. And we'll give you some tips on where we think, you'll get the biggest bang for your buck over the next few slides. And I will say from our experience, some of our most successful engagements with clients, we've been able to quantify the financial costs and impact of key HR metrics, including retention and turnover, because there's nothing a CEO understands more than the impacts to their bottom line. And then they're more willing to invest in those areas because it has an impact.
And I think that's a great point, Vanessa. And I think it's really worthwhile for organisations to spend the time actually finding out what actually it costs. To Janine's point, previously we worked with clients where they thought their turnover was just a few $100,000 when actually it was millions of dollars. So if you're looking at that just as one area where it's costing your organisation millions of dollars, what are all of those other areas costing you as well? And you'll have that greater picture. So it's really important, rather than just looking at those sort of percentage numbers and general information, to actually take the time to sit down and actually find out the key dollar amounts.
I think what's also really interesting is, again, we try to stay really connected in the market and find out what people are thinking when we're going through times like this and in COVID. And, we can see organisations pulling back from investing in their people because they are worried about the bottom line, and they're sitting there saying, well, we want to stay viable. And I get it, ultimately you have to make balanced decisions. But at the same time, we're asking more of our people. We've in many organisations have asked their people to work very differently. They've asked their people sometimes to take salary cuts. They've asked their people to work harder, longer hours, or to change the work that they're doing to help the organisation stay successful. And what's really fascinating is when you talk to organisations where their employees feel really strongly connected, they have been astounded by the approach that people have taken. They have an all-in, we're all in it together, we're going to get us through this kind of attitude. And you can see that coming through with organisations who are able to pull through really tough times because they have that attitude. And people are prepared to take some personal sacrifice. So it's not always, when we're talking about investing in your people, it's not always actually investing dollars. It's not, to your point, Vanessa, thinking about what new benefits we can add and pool tables and all of that sort of stuff. It's actually being really true to the people that you have in your organisation, recognising that you're all in it together, and having the ability to drive the sorts of changes that are going to help them feel that they are connected to your higher purpose and where you're trying to go. So I do think it's just really valid to think about this through this time where people are going, well, I need to pull back from investing there's different ways to invest in your people, and that's important to know as well.
That's a great perspective to bring, Janine, and a perfect segue to our next slide, which is where do you invest in your people for maximum ROI? And this is based off of our experience coming from in-house HR roles and advising our clients in this space. And we strongly believe, and we're quite passionate, that you'll get a good return on your investment when you focus on these 3 areas. So developing your line manager capabilities, given the significant impact they have directly on the people that report into them, that you should lean into people's strengths, and that you should know what to measure and then take action based on that. And we'll unpack each of these areas as we go, but I just want to point out in this visual that you can see that the line manager is really central to the measurement and taking action, and also the ability to recognize and lean into people's strengths because of the impact they have. So let's jump in. Investing in your line managers first. Start at the top. This is really important. What we mean by this is that executives need to understand the link between people and profits, because leaders that understand the impact and the influence employees have on the organization as a whole are then able to shift their perspective from people being a cost to people being a benefit. And that subtle shift in mindset and thinking, you start to see different things in the organization. And it trickles culturally, and it trickles through the managers all the way down. It can be felt on the front line.
That's so true. Even if you think about your organization, or even organizations we've worked with, when the mindset of the executives is that a function like HR or finance are cost centers, the way that they're treated, how they're looked, it actually is one way, and it permeates through the organisation. Whereas if you see them as value add and critical to your success, that permeates, and then a different culture is set as well. So your impact at the top and your ability to truly understand the value of everyone in your organisation is an extremely powerful lever that you have.
And it's not always easy to do that. From your experience, Janine, what's the best way for executives to see or feel the impact of investing in their people?
Oh, great question, Vanessa. You've dumped me in that one. So, look, it's interesting. I'm not sure I'm going to answer that question precisely, but when I think about really powerful leaders that I've worked with who have an impact through this, one, they have a philosophical and a values-based approach to leadership in the first place, and I think that's really solid. Two, what I see is that they ask the right questions, and and that has a really powerful impact on then when people prepare to make change in their organisation, or where people are responding to issues in their organisation. The questions that you are asking as a leader really does help to drive the behaviour of what people are going to come to you with, and I find that really amazing, because I think about organisations that I've worked with and I've seen a leadership change. An old leader comes out, new leader comes in, and you get a sense of that new leader really quickly in what they're interested in those initial briefing discussions and the questions that they ask. And very quickly, I see the behaviour shift and change for the managers that report into them and down the line, because all of a sudden they put their energy into focusing on what they think that leader is going to be looking for. So I think it's a perfect example of how powerful it is to get that alignment at the very top. Marianne, I can see you itching.
So I love this topic, and here's a little activity anyone listening can do. So to Janine's point, you are values-led. Let's say you're a leader that's values-led. You could also be a leader that's very good at managing up, right? So we have these discussions a lot.
We do.
So what we want to do is say, okay, here's a very simple activity. What you do is you could put your line managers' photos up on a wall. Really simply, beautiful photos of your line managers. Next to that, you put, where do you see them in the future? Are they a successor for a role? How do you think they are at managing their teams? All of those kinds of different areas. How is it that the executive team see that particular line manager? Now, what you do is, underneath each of the line managers is you start to pile on the metrics. So what's the turnover like in that particular team? What's absenteeism like in that particular team? What are promotions like in that team? And you begin to paint a picture that either supports what you're thinking or a picture that maybe doesn't support what you're thinking. Now, data, in very simple terms like this, helps you begin to have some very critical conversations around the impact a line manager has on your organization. And that moves to point 2 in terms of line managers understanding the impact they have on people is huge. So when you go home and you've had your managers has said something amazing to you, you're flying high, you feel great, let's go out, I feel like dinner, everything's wonderful, and you're talking about it. By the same token, if your line manager doesn't say something good to you and they're showing you some of the areas you could improve in, or it was a really tough discussion, or you're not seeing the value, you take that home and your behaviour shifts as well, whether it's with your friends or with your family.
I love that example. I'm actually you just threw me back into a conversation I had with someone last week, and we were talking in, general terms around where he was taking his business, etc. And he said to me, Janine, I had this most amazing experience last week. I worked really hard to get this deal sorted. I had to pull, different people from across the business. It was all, and then he said, I presented it, and the first question the leader said to me is, why did it take so long? And he said, I was crushed. But what was interesting is that's an impact, and I get it. And it's not an invalid question to ask, because there are some process issues that they need to deal with. But what was really telling is then he said, and then I had to go into a meeting with my customer, and I just wasn't there. I couldn't give that customer the energy that I needed to give. So I went from a high up here to just crashing. And I think that's a really telling thing. And we often forget as a leader. We all have our bad days, and we all have our different things that we're focusing on. But having a leader truly understand what the impact is that they can have for an individual in their team, I think is a really powerful way to invest time.
Yeah.
Why is it so misunderstood, the value they bring?
Can you really, so if you think about it, think about the people that usually get promoted. They're technically brilliant. They solve problems. They get promoted based on a particular skill that they have. Now, when you get promoted, that's fine if you technically get promoted and you're not managing people. But the minute you start managing a team, that particular skill that you've harnessed and you've learned and you've really done really well with, it's not as relevant as you now bringing out the best in others, removing roadblock for others, knowing the difference that each person in your team brings, which we'll talk about in a moment. But now the skills that you need to be an amazing line manager are different. And what happens is, if we go to number 3, not a lot of organizations build the line manager capability to be great at being line managers. So if we think about it, think of a flower that's probably in your garden, or a hedge, like the hedge in my garden now that was green and is now brown thanks to the frost. What you do when you look at that hedge is you say, okay, what do I need to do to improve that? Do I need to put water on it to get the frost off? Do I need to put vitamins in the soil? What needs to happen to get, to invest in my hedge? Now, if you think of a line manager, when you invest in your line manager, it's the same as investing in the plant or the flower or the hedge. You've got to think about, what do I need to give and show and build to make that line manager flourish? Because when they do the exact same things to the people in their teams. They bring out the strengths in people in their teams, because they begin to learn that it's not about your technical ability, line manager, it's about how you bring the best out in your team and how you're bringing the different thinking together. So it's interesting how, when you don't have the tools, you look at that line manager and you're like, they need to go out. That's it, we're done. But do you go out in your garden pulling everything out that could be amazing and wonderful and could give you so much more to your garden, to the environment, to your home? You don't. You may sometimes, so we're saying that may need to happen.
Sometimes it's the wrong plant in the wrong place.
Yeah, sometimes
but if it's the right plant in the right place and it's not flourishing, then maybe you just need to focus on the other elements around it that you can control.
Exactly. But a big part of it then is obviously emotional intelligence, and therefore really connecting with your people and knowing those questions to ask. Now, Marianne or Janine, is that something therefore that you can train your managers to have, or is it something that happens naturally?
I think you can train. You can train. So when you don't have training around and you've got someone that's naturally brilliant in that space, you're really lucky. But you can actually train on the different elements.
And I would agree with you. I know you're looking at me hesitantly, Marianne, like I'm going to come in and say, no, you can't. It's innate. But I think it's a combination.
I'm in two minds.
It is a combination. I think there are some people that you can deliver all of the training in the world and it probably won't shift.
Yeah.
So, you know, and that's maybe the wrong plant or the right plant in the wrong place.
Yeah.
But I think there are other people where you have to recognize that if the only way you have learnt to be a leader is by looking at the leaders around you and you haven't had amazing role models who have guided you and coached you and mentored you to be a great leader, then how on earth can you develop a skill set that you've never seen in action?
Yeah.
So I think there are absolutely ways that you can help shift and guide and build a leader's capability there. I think the challenge is that often when organisations focus on transitioning a person into a managerial role, they actually probably focus more on the technical side of management, which is, you know, how to run a performance improvement process or, you know, what does discrimination look like? And they're important elements. But to take a person on the journey from that more of the emotional intelligence side of leading, I think is another element again. And when we don't always have the right kind of and you know, just going through a 3-day training course is not going to cut that. It needs to be a combination of different ways to reinforce those skill sets.
That's exactly right. And if I think of just some of the competencies you need, would anyone have thought listening? Listening, as simple as that is a very powerful competency to have as a line manager, particularly when you pair it up with perspective or the ability to stand alone, so make decisions and know what's right. So listening, just as an example, like we go into organisations, we can look, we can see the fabric of an organisation and know what will work here. But listening is one that's very, very powerful, and even sizing up people. So your ability to look at someone and know what is the gift that person brings and how do I help them bring that gift to life, then all of a sudden as a line manager opens your mind to a broader team that you could possibly have. When you know the gifts each person brings, you then know who else do I need to bring into the team that has a different gift that brings us up to another level.
I love, often Marianne, you remind me all the time when I'm sitting there thinking I need to have all the answers. As a line manager, you'll say to me, Janine, you don't need to have all the answers. And it's a very powerful reminder. I think what the challenge though is as you become more experienced in your career as a leader, you can sit in that and recognize that your value is not knowing everything. But when you're first promoted into a managerial role, that is not always, you know, people have this sense of, you know, everybody knows about imposter syndrome, where you feel like at some point somebody's going to recognize that I'm not all that, that I don't know everything. And so in actual fact, what I often see for new managers is that they're almost overly confident and trying to project a level of, yes, I'm all over this, when in actual fact, one of the most important capabilities in a manager is not just recognizing the strengths in others, but recognizing their own strengths and recognizing when those strengths need some help to balance out. So being able to say in a team, I don't know everything. I know this stuff, this is where I'm going to be really strong and I need help here. And I think that's a really important part of it as well.
So I love what you're saying there, Janine. And in a couple of slides, I think we need to sit in that a bit more.
Beautiful.
Because that is gold.
Yeah, I think we can all agree that investing in your line managers has one of the greatest impacts on your organization, and it's often undervalued.
Yeah.
I think we could have a whole discussion on that.
We could.
Purely.
I would just wrap it up by saying, you know, I think all of us here have worked in some of the most amazing organisations in the world, and I think those that have had a strong culture have a significant investment they make in their leaders.
Yeah.
A strong culture in
Consistently.
promoting talent, knowing that actually that's the edge that you need. Janine is right. There is a strong focus on that, which means there's time in it, which means there's cost that goes to it.
Exactly right. All right, let's move on to our second recommendation on where you should spend your money to get a great return. So know what to measure, and then based on that, take action, do something about it. So knowing what to measure, as we looked at early on in this pack, there is an abundance of metrics available. Engagement, turnover, absenteeism, number of promotions from within. You can even look at customer success, NPS. There is so much data that, quite frankly, it's overwhelming. And to find the actual true nuggets of information, you need to look at it, because the worst is to have data for data's sake and to do nothing about it, and just to be collecting information because it's a reporting requirement, but not really spending the time and investing the energy to understand what lies beneath that. You know, this is more than just about the infamous annual engagement survey that everyone is familiar with. It's about collecting data formally, so from channels like that, but also informally through conversations. Leverage your line managers that have the capabilities to ask the right questions in order to draw meaningful insights and connect the dots and uncover the hidden stories.
Yeah.
And then once you're clear on what you're measuring and you're doing it regularly, as Marianne said, listening and communicating is a critical skill. Asking questions. So if, for example, you're seeing an increase in sick days or absenteeism, you can ask your peers or your team, what's going on? Have I missed something? Just ask them. They will tell you. Listening to your people is investing with them and investing in them, because they can tell you what they need and what next steps you should consider. They may not have all the answers, but it's a good starting point. And that allows them to grow and for you to become a stronger leader. You may, I know you believe in this, Janine, that you want to equip your mind managers, and that comes back to our previous slide around building their capability. So they may not know what questions to ask or how to ask them. So it's important you support them in doing that. This comes back to communication, and there's a cost, as with everything else, there's a cost associated with that. There is research and data shows, you know, that there's a research study that says over 400 companies with 100,000 employees, of which there's an average loss per company of 62.4 million per year because of inadequate communication just to and from employees.
Wow.
That's not external stakeholders or partners or customers. That's just an internal cost of miscommunication. And if you're a smaller organization, there's also data that shows that miscommunication can cost hundreds of thousands per year if you have 100 employees or less.
Yeah.
So investing in building that capability and getting your communication right and listening will support your bottom line metrics as well.
Can I say, I still remember one of my first job actually in HR was in a company called Merck Sharp & Dome many years ago. And I joined that company because they were a very value-based organization. I was really excited to be there. When we talk about investing in staff, every employee within the first 3 months of joining that company had to go through a communications training program that was all about how we communicate in this organization. And then when you became a manager, you had to go through the manager's version of that same training, and they reinforced it at different points during your career. So sometimes investing in those soft skills, you look at that and go, well, that's a cost of X dollars. But when you quantify it the way you did just then, Vanessa, and show what the reverse cost is in not having effective communication, I think you start to see the power in those trade-offs that you end up making. The difference between the two is it's a very tangible cost to run a program like that. It's less tangible and more difficult to quantify what the cost of not running a training program like that is. But it's really interesting when you look at those sorts of stats and build out the right business cases to say, you know, we will see a shift and change. And I think often just looking at that shareholder value metric, some of your bottom line metrics really start to bring that to fruition, because when you have a baseline and you start to measure things and then you track certain initiatives and measure along the way, I think that's when you get the power of it.
Yeah.
Because what I find is, we used to do dashboards all the time. You would have done it, Marianne. And every month you go, okay, this is what our turnover looked like, and this is what absenteeism looked like, and this is what our annual leave balance is. There's no real insight from it, and it's not linked to any initiatives. So if it shifts, you don't really know why.
Exactly right.
So it's about getting really clear on what those metrics are telling you, and then helping to actually track some of the initiatives that you do against those.
Now, what I love about this particular area in terms of knowing what to measure, communicating it, and then doing something about it, is that I just want each of you that are listening to reflect in your organisation. You probably do parts of this. Doing parts of it doesn't get you there. So when you see that there is a problem in a metric, your ability to communicate and understand why is step one. And then your ability to do something with it is the final step of it. So any of you that are listening and you know, and you're sitting there going, oh, I know this particular area isn't where it needs to be. Your next step is now to ask and do something with it. And what happens is over time, you begin to strengthen the trust between employees, your line managers and your organisation. Because if you continue to do these repetitive steps, it tells people you are here, you are listening, and you are interested in how they feel and what they want.
It's almost like you're holding them accountable and you're holding yourself accountable to actually make changes.
Yeah.
Because how many times we've done those surveys, completed the same thing, the same issues and the same concerns, and the whispers around the office are like, what's the point? Never ever going to change.
Yeah.
It's never really, why are we even doing this? We don't even know the data behind it, or whatever it might be. It's having that ability to actually change, make an actual change and show the progress.
And I think to your point, Callie, you always hear murmurs of what's not working. Anyone listening that's an executive or a line manager in HR, it is your responsibility to put out also what is working. We did that and this is what happened from it. We're not perfect, but we're moving in the right direction.
Yeah.
And what you do then is you give people hope. It's a continuous wheel of this is fantastic, we do stuff, we move forward and we'll get there.
We learn, we change, we develop. Yeah.
I think the other really pertinent thing is to also understand, I often, even as a line manager myself, sometimes you're in a position in an organisation where you go, well, I can't impact all of this. This is bigger than me.
Yeah.
But I think what's very powerful is that in your role, you actually have a huge amount of influence and impact on your team. And that actually does permeate through the organisation. So I think, one thing is being, interested in the bigger data and looking at absenteeism through the whole organisation. The other thing is actually being very clear about what's happening in your own team. And I will often see, you get a person who's taking a lot of annual leave, and I'll have a manager come to me for advice and go, right, well, not annual leave, sorry, sick leave, or there's a consistent pattern to their sick leave, or whatever it is. And it seems to put the fear into people that I can't ask the question. But I think when you ask from the right position, when you ask because you genuinely care and you genuinely want to understand what's going on, I think you get a really positive response from people. So the first discussion I will always have with someone when I see that is, are you okay?
Yeah.
What is going on?
Yeah.
I genuinely want to understand. And, when you start from that position, you actually, whether it's a systemic issue that's happening in the organisation that's driving that behaviour, or whether it's just that individual's personal circumstances, you actually start to build a picture of what's going on, and you can figure out where you can have an impact and change. So I think it's important to recognise that there's the macro and understanding this from a whole of organisation perspective, but every single person in an organisation has an ability to impact culture in their own space as well.
And I think people want to be heard. Like, if someone came to me and said, are you okay? Great, here's my opportunity to say everything. People want to actually share their point of view. They want to share what's happening in their life. They want to share what's happening, what's going on. And it's just purely asking those questions.
And and you have to be genuine, though. I will
Absolutely, you definitely have to be genuine.
If you've got an agenda, then be prepared for the fact that you're not going to get to the right outcome. But if you are genuinely asking the questions and you're prepared to build the trust and recognise that not everybody's going to be Callie and be ready to offer it up, if you genuinely care, you will get traction.
Yeah, what's interesting? What comes to mind for me is how this starts to shift your culture. These actions and these deliberate areas of focus start to change your culture for the better.
Yeah.
And that's something that's very topical and that can have a huge impact on employee engagement, and some of the metrics we looked at from a profitability and a financial performance perspective. Okay. This is the final area we're going to look at, and Marianne's cheering because we're a firm believer in this, leaning into people's strengths. And this is about zooming in on what people are really good at, what they're passionate about, what they enjoy, because that's ultimately where they'll excel at in their careers. And the first step is understanding the strengths that you have in your people, in your teams.
Janine, you are a huge advocate of this.
Yes.
Yeah,
Just
absolutely.
share, what is it you do with your team that shows that this is something you value?
There's probably a lot that I do with that team, but the first thing is from the very first day I will meet a prospective employee, all I want to understand is what they're passionate about. Because I know that if you have skill sets and you love using those skill sets, and that those skill sets and that passion fit with the gap that I have in my team, we are 90% of the way there. There's other questions around how you perform and all of those sorts of things that are important. But from day one, I want to know what you're passionate about, what gets you excited when you get out of bed. And then every single time we look at a project, every opportunity we have, if I see the energy shift in someone in the middle of a project, my first question is, are you loving what you're doing? Because if you're not, then I need to understand it and I need to figure out a way to help you make sure you've got someone partnering with you on this project who does love it, so we can get to the end of it, and then we need to figure out if we ever put you on a project like that. And that's not because I don't value you or because I don't want you working on different areas, but it's because I want you to work on a daily basis in the areas that you're passionate about. And that is not just because I'm warm, fuzzy, touchy-feely leader. I am very, very clearly business focused, and I know, frankly, I will make more money. Our business will make more money. I will have better outcomes for my clients if I have the right people who are doing what they are passionate about. And it is as clear and simple as that.
Well, it comes also back then to our original first point. If people aren't loving their job and loving what they're doing, guess what's going to happen? They're going to go find another job where they are able to actually do what they love.
True, but worse they stay, and they're miserable. And I keep butting my head up against a brick wall going, why is this so hard to get you to the end of this project? Why am I having to manage you so closely on this to get to an outcome?
Can I add here? I want people listening to think about a couple of things. Think about, if you're a line manager, think about the development plans of people in your team. If you're in HR, think about the same thing from a systems perspective, systemic perspective. And if you're an individual contributor, think about it from you. How many times have you had the same thing on a development plan year in, year out? Nothing shifts, it's still there. It's still a conversation point. Why do we do this to our people? What we should be doing is saying, what are you brilliant at? How do we make that a bigger focus? How do I build your capability in that particular area? And it's the same mindset for succession planning. Why is it some organizations need everyone to have ticked absolutely everything before they move them into the next role? There's no point to that. The point is that you stretch people and you get them growing and moving in an area that they love. That doesn't mean they're not learning and uncomfortable. So organizations that do this and do it well, and managers that know how to bring the best out in their people, they're steps ahead. Their productivity is high. Their profit
shareholder value
is high. So it's a wonderful thing.
But what about for organisations that don't have all of these different opportunities available for all of their employees? They might be an organisation that's quite small, so everyone's kind of in a role that role has to actually be done. What sort of advice can you give to them?
So I would say, and this is, when I first came upon, and if you're interested in this, there's a whole lot of research by Gallup on strengths, and there's strength finder tools, there's books that you can listen to.
Oprah did a segment.
There you go. And if Oprah did a segment, we're all over it. But what is interesting is in every role, there are still different ways that you can perform that role. Now, when I first did this, I was a HR manager, and my other HR manager that I worked with, we all did the same job. We did a HR manager job, and we had specific clients that we supported, and that is what we did. And when we did this, we realized that in fact she had strengths on a technical like the remuneration review. She loved that. Oh my Lord, it used to do my head in, that spreadsheet. I was ready to shoot myself on an annual basis. She loved it. She loved project managing. She loved all of that. I loved getting in front of a group of people and facilitating a workshop. I loved all of that side of things. We still fundamentally had our own clients that we needed to support, but it meant if there was something that needed project planning and it needed to go across the business, she put her hand up and said, I'll focus, I'll lead that, and Janine, you just contribute what you need to get your teams across the line. If we needed to create a training program that was going to go across the organisation, I would lead that, and she would help make sure that we targeted the right people in her program to do that. Now that's at a HR manager level, but the same can be said at any job. There will be different ways that you can perform that job, and you can partner and do things slightly differently to make sure you get a better outcome.
So to what Janine's saying, what I want you to think about is, do you have a culture that allows people to say, I don't enjoy that particular piece, but I see you're really good at that. Can you do more of that? So it goes back to investing in your line managers, because they're the ones that help you create those cultures. So you've got to think about, are you in a space, and how do you create a space where people will be that honest to say, I'm not good in this area and I love these other pieces, and they come together.
And you know it's working when in our team dynamic, everybody just knows going into a project. Get Marianne to do this bit, get Kelly or Vanessa to do this other bit. And by the way, when we hire someone, can we make sure somebody's got some really great spreadsheeting skills and like to tick boxes and be really organized in their approach? And that means there's no tension around it, because everybody just goes, yep, that's my bit.
Yeah,
I'm all over it.
And I think the other thing, Janine, is I love working with our team because, one, we're clear on each other's strengths. So you're particularly clear on how to create opportunities for each and every one to be at their best, but also that you're quite open with where your strengths are and your limitations when you need to lean on us for something else. So creating that safety in the space and that vulnerability allows us to share with you where we feel, we're not in our sweet spot.
And it's not always comfortable to do that, mind you, because again, we're rewarded for saying we know everything.
Yeah.
That's
right.
what our society is about.
Yeah.
But when you start to build that trust in a team, you can really, I think, have such a strong impact on the culture of your organisation, but more than that, the productivity, your ability to have amazing client experiences, all of those things that drive ultimately that shareholder value.
Yeah, and what I love about this discussion is it helps and leans into diversity. So we're not going to go down at too much detail now, but the fact that you're clear on what people bring means you're clear on what you still need to make a very well-rounded team. So you start to look at diversity of thought and how you bring that in to better serve your customers and your clients.
Exactly right. And the final bullet, we've touched on it slightly around integrating your processes. This is a bigger fish to fry. This is around looking at, as Marianne mentioned, your performance management, your development, your learning strategies, and how does this strength-based learning and leadership approach shift those core processes in your business and become part of your everyday to ultimately shift your culture to drive better outcomes.
So just to make it very real and tangible, if you have a performance management system that at the moment possibly looks at development areas, then you've probably got to pick 2 or 3. How about looking at the first question being, what do you love doing? What do you want to do more of? And then how do we get you doing more of that? So very simple tweaks that allow you now to focus on things that are very important and linked to strength.
And you can see that, to your example previously about if you've got an activity on your development plan that's been there for 3 years in a row, if that activity is something that you're excited about because it plays to your strengths in an area that you want to really grow, that activity is not going to stay there for 3 years because it's something that you're pushing for. But if you've got something that sits there for 3 years, you can guarantee you that that is an area that is never going to be a strength for you, and you are never going to get excited about closing the gap on it.
Yeah. So anyone listening that has one of those, just remove it.
Yeah.
Move on. Focus on what you're brilliant at.
Yeah. Okay, so just really wrapping up then and sending you back to your day and thinking about how you take these learnings back into it. The first thing I would say is if you're going back into your organisation, you're saying, right, I think we need to invest in our people. I think I'd like to see us take some time to shift there. What can you actually do? So the first thing I would say is actually start to understand what's going on in your business. See what metrics that you have, whether that's employee turnover, whether that's taking you a long time to fill vacant positions, whether that's a high level of absenteeism, whether you have engagement survey data that you can look at. Start with understanding what those metrics are, and then get under those metrics and try to understand what it is that those metrics are telling you. And for us, that usually means talking to people, and not just sitting in a workshop and saying, guys, what could we do that would make an improvement? And everybody comes up with a Friday sausage sizzle and a new ping pong table, but actually having coffees with people or going out and talking to some of the teams and saying, help me understand what's actually going on here, and create that kind of connection and that willingness to shift things. So look for those meaningful insights. And then start to think about how can you really focus on developing your line manager capabilities. Now, whether that's do you have the right line managers in the right roles, or whether that's how can you actually help think about the capabilities that you need to be building around communication, around insights into staff, whatever that is. But start to think about how could you support your line managers to help you on this journey. If you're a line manager and you're trying to think about that for yourself, then do take some time to reflect. Take some time to think about how might this play out, and ask for some feedback from your team about what's the stuff that they see you really strong at, what's the stuff that they think you could actually shift in. It's hard sometimes, and you need to make sure that you start by talking to people that you have some good trusted relationships with. But if you lean into those sorts of conversations and you lean into understanding more about yourself, I can guarantee you that will start to play out in your team, and they'll respect that, and that willingness.
Just to jump in, Janine, this is a really simple activity you can do with yourself, because I was trying to validate my strengths. Is just at the end of each day, write down what gave you energy that day.
Yeah.
And then you'll see a common thread throughout the entire day, and you'll be much clearer on what your strengths are, and you'll back yourself a lot more as a leader.
I agree. That's one of my favorite activities, and it was the first one I ever did on the strengths side. There's great tools. There's a strengths finder tool that you can do, but if you really want it to be tangible and something that you can apply to your current job, doing the strengths diary, which is just exactly what Vanessa said. Where did I get my energy today? What excited me? When did I lose track of work because I was so excited about what I was doing? And conversely, where was I drained? Where did I really struggle to actually, sit down and get through that, and then talk to your team and see what they say. Oh, I mean, nearly every person in my team has such a different strength to me that I know who I can pick up the phone and call when I am struggling on a particular activity, because they will get excited about it and either do it for me or help push me along and get me over my little hump. So I think it's a really powerful process.
So Janine and Marianne, if we really focus on these areas, developing line manager capabilities, know what to measure and take action, and lean into people's strengths, how quickly can we see a shift in some of that impact on the bottom line?
So things like absenteeism, I think you can see
very quickly. Yeah.
Turnover probably takes a month or two, like in a particular team.
Still a month or two, that's pretty good.
Yeah, now when it comes to things like happy customers, you need multiple teams. You need a bigger, it takes longer.
Yeah, well, you need it to go across the organisation.
Yeah. So some of these things you can see very quickly, and other things take time. And the take time thing means you just need to keep at it. Keep doing what works.
Yeah, I would agree. Okay, so that's it from us for today. Up on the screen now are our contact details. If any of this is something that you would like to talk more about, please don't hesitate to give one of my team a call, myself, Marianne, Vanessa. Vanessa's an amazing strength in our business around change management, around project and operating model development. Vanessa is one of those people that sees linkages between everything that happens in an organisation and how to pull it all together. So if you're looking for, okay, I really want to tap into somebody's thinking about that, then Vanessa is your person. Marianne's really deep into HR. So if you're thinking about talent management, succession planning, leadership development, those sorts of areas, Marianne is absolutely the person to tap into. Callie runs our virtual HR offering. So if you're looking at your whole HR team and looking at, okay, how do we come together? Where are we effective? How are we delivering value to our organisation? Then Callie's great to talk to. And that's probably one of my favourite areas as well. So if that's your area that you're kind of thinking through, by all means, give one of us a call. And then you can see we've got some other team members there. Annie Claude around change, and Flo is all about strategy and innovation. So do reach out to any one of us if you have anything that you're interested in talking about. And up on the screen now are the different webinars we've been running this year and going into next year. And if you're interested in any other topics, we have a plethora of webinars we ran last year that deep dive into some of these different topics around talent management, around strengths, etc. So by all means, jump onto our website and have a look at them. And I will leave you all with our standard disclaimer, which says all care is put into this, but please understand that if you need specific advice for your organisation, then absolutely tap into us and we're happy to help you out. Take care and have an amazing day.
Have a great day.
Bye.